On March 8th, day 9 of the war, on 60 Minutes, you assured the American people of Iranian surrender. Does that remain your prediction? 3 weeks later, you declared victory. That was now nearly 4 months ago. 3 weeks after you'd already said Iran's military was destroyed and combat ineffective, you said, quote, Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory. You said Iran's military had been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come. And you stated we had, quote, achieved every single objective. Were those accurate statements?
It certainly was, on behalf of the men and women in uniform, a historic military victory.
On day 14 of this conflict, Mr. Secretary, day 14, nearly 5 months ago, you stated that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. That was on day 14 of the war. Was that an accurate statement?
They didn't have a Navy any longer. It was completely sunk. Their missiles were buried underneath a lot of their underground facilities, and their defense industrial base has been almost completely destroyed. So as far as a military assessment of Iran's capabilities, it didn't mean by any stretch of the imagination absolute zero, but their capabilities
Mr. Secretary,
at the lowest level
you
they've been in a
stated
very
that
long time.
on day 14 of this conflict, in the second week of the conflict, you stated that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. Was that an accurate statement? Yes or no?
Iran's ability to challenge the United States of America at the level at which we're capable of.
That's not what I asked you, Mr. Secretary. You said on day 14 Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. Yes or no? Was that an accurate statement?
What the American military has done to the
question?
Iranian military is a historic military defeat,
answer the
and
question
they're ineffective
under oath?
in that context.
3 weeks later, you declared victory. That was now nearly 4 months ago. 3 weeks after you'd already said Iran's military was destroyed and combat ineffective, you said, quote, Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory. You said Iran's military had been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come. And you stated we had, quote, achieved every single objective. Were those accurate statements?
It certainly was, on behalf of the men and women in uniform, a historic military victory over Iran.
Had Iran's military been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come? That was a statement that you made 4 months ago.
They had 160 naval vessels
You need
in
to
the
answer
Blue Water
the questions,
Navy,
Mr.
and they're gone.
Secretary.
Their Air Force is completely combat ineffective, and they don't have a defense industrial base. So describe to me a country that doesn't have an Air Force, a Navy, or a defense industrial base, and I will describe to you a country that does not have an effective military. It can lob missiles.
Mr. Secretary, you stated 4 months ago that Iran's military had been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come. Has Iran's military been, for the last 4 months, combat ineffective?
It's been set back not just years, but likely decades.
You stated we had, quote,
build at the level it did before, and not even close. It doesn't mean it doesn't have capabilities.
Mr. Secretary, you stated we had, quote, achieved every single objective. Was that an accurate statement 4 months ago?
The main objective of this was to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Their main sites were obliterated. We're watching over them, and we're holding them at issue. If they don't give them up at the table, there's other ways we can take them away.
Early in the conflict
Iran will
on
never
day
have a
3,
nuclear
Mr.
weapon.
Secretary, early in the conflict, day 3, you said one of those core objectives was to, quote, destroy the missile threat. And as you restated on day 5, to, quote, obliterate Iran's missiles and drones. Those were clearly and repeatedly stated core objectives of the campaign, which 4 months ago you declared had been completed victoriously with every single objective achieved. Were those objectives achieved 4 months ago?
No one ever stated that every single missile was gone. Ultimately, combat ineffective means they're not able to dig them out of their UGFs and shoot at us.
Had the missile threat
It doesn't mean they
been
don't have
defeated
underground
4 months
facilities
ago?
where they put missiles in them and hold on to them because they're the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. So we never expected they would stop having capabilities to shoot. The question is at scale against an opponent like the United States of America, which went toe-to-toe with them, and Iran couldn't.
You stated on March 8th, day 9 of the war, on 60 Minutes, you assured the American people of Iranian surrender. Does that remain your prediction?
Ultimately, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon to threaten the United States of America. That has been the objective, and it remains so.
So just to review, You will not answer whether your statement made on the 14th day of the war that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and made combat ineffective was a truthful statement to the American people as you sit here and ask for tens of billions more for the conflict.
Senator's time has
Had a
expired.
historic and effective military campaign against the largest state sponsor of terrorism.
Won't answer the
Ensure they
question.
never
Senator
get a new
Peters
weapon, Senator.
is
Several months before this hearing, administration officials described Operation Epic Fury as one of the most significant U.S. military operations against Iran in decades. Following the strikes, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth repeatedly stated that Iran's military had been destroyed, combat ineffective, and unable to challenge the United States in any meaningful way. President Trump also declared the operation a major success and said its primary objective, crippling Iran's nuclear capabilities, had been achieved. As the months passed, however, the focus in Washington shifted. The question was no longer simply whether the operation had succeeded, but whether the administration's public descriptions accurately reflected the security situation that followed. By the time of this Senate Appropriations Committee hearing on July 22, 2026, Congress was reviewing the administration's request for additional defense funding related to the Iran conflict. Earlier the same day, Secretary Hegseth testified that military operations associated with the conflict had already cost approximately $37.5 billion, with the Pentagon seeking billions more to replenish precision-guided munitions, strengthen force protection, maintain regional deployments, and preserve U.S. deterrence in the Middle East. Against that backdrop, Senator Jon Ossoff approached the hearing differently from many of his colleagues. Instead of debating military tactics or foreign policy, he focused almost entirely on the defense secretary's own public statements. Throughout the exchange, Ossoff repeatedly quoted Hegseth's earlier remarks and asked whether those statements were still accurate. It was a methodical line of questioning designed to compare past public claims with the administration's current requests before Congress. Secretary Hegseth defended his previous comments by drawing a distinction between destroying a country's conventional military capability and eliminating every remaining threat. He argued that Iran's navy had been devastated, its air defense network severely weakened, and much of its defense industrial capacity damaged. From his perspective, those outcomes justified describing Iran as combat ineffective because it could no longer conduct large-scale conventional operations against the United States at the level it could before the conflict. Senator Ossoff challenged that interpretation. He pointed out that months after those declarations of victory, Iran still possessed missiles, continued threatening regional stability, and remained a significant security concern. He also noted that if the administration believed the mission had achieved every objective, Congress was now being asked to consider billions of dollars in additional military spending connected to the same conflict. His questions centered on whether the administration's public messaging had overstated the extent of the military success. Another important aspect of this exchange is how congressional oversight works. Cabinet officials often describe military operations in broad strategic terms, highlighting objectives achieved and capabilities degraded. Members of Congress, on the other hand, frequently revisit those same statements months later to determine whether they remain consistent with later developments and whether taxpayers are receiving an accurate explanation of why additional funding is needed. That process is one of Congress's core constitutional oversight responsibilities. It's also important to separate the political debate from verified facts. During this hearing, Senator Ossoff argued that the administration's language may have created expectations that Iran's military threat had largely disappeared. Secretary Hegseth maintained that his statements referred to Iran's ability to wage conventional warfare against the United States, not to the complete elimination of every missile, drone, or proxy capability. The hearing itself did not resolve that disagreement. Instead, it placed both interpretations on the public record for lawmakers and the American people to evaluate. Beyond the exchange itself, this hearing reflects a broader challenge faced by every administration during wartime. Military operations are often measured in strategic objectives, while elected officials must also explain those operations to Congress and the public using clear and precise language. As circumstances evolve, earlier statements naturally receive renewed scrutiny, especially when Congress is asked to authorize additional funding or continue long-term military commitments. For viewers, The most significant takeaway isn't simply whether one side scored political points. The real significance is that this hearing demonstrates how congressional oversight continues long after military operations are declared successful. Public statements made during a conflict don't disappear once the fighting slows. They become part of the official record, and lawmakers can return months later to compare those statements with subsequent events, funding requests, intelligence assessments, and conditions on the ground. That's exactly what Senator Ossoff attempted to do here, making this exchange less about a single quote and more about how government officials communicate military success, justify future spending, and maintain public confidence in their assessments.